So it's the late 90s and Death Row Records isn't quite the powerhouse it used to be.
And now that his trial is over, he's finally able to speak his mind about the feelings and emotions he had during this long case.
We, the jury in above entitled action, find the defendant, Calvin Brodus, not guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Dr. Dre leaves around March of 96, and then Tupac passes away in September, leaving a gaping hole in the label's talent. Now, as if that wasn't enough, Suge Knight, the head of the label, gets sent to prison for violating the terms of his probation. Now remember that this was the 90s version of Suge Knight, and he had quite the reputation. Suge Knight was known for constantly hanging out with gang members. He also ran his label like the army and would constantly punish his artists for doing wrong, sometimes even making them drink urine. He also allegedly dangled Vanilla Ice over a balcony to force him to sign over royalties for Ice Ice Baby, and that's because he believed Vanilla Ice sampled his client without payment. Also, rappers signed to Death Row Records and Suge Knight were afraid to leave the label. They'd be like, Suge, I love Death Row, and I really appreciate everything you've done for me. Really I do. But I think I'd be a better fit at another label, right? What do you think, Suge? Then Suge would go, sure, you can leave. That's if you want to leave in this body bag, right? And suddenly they're like, you know what, on second thought, I've never felt more at home here. I really love the studio decor. I love this place. I love you. Ah, you're amazing. Then Suge would go, great. I'm glad you love me. Now drink this urine, right? People back then were terrified of Suge Knight.
They was not scared of Suge Knight. They was terrified of Suge Knight.
Right.
I mean, terrified.
I know.
No, to death.
To death.
So with all of these things going on, Snoop starts to look around like, this is a sinking ship. And not only that, this label is not paying me fairly. And most of my property is under Death Row Records. That doesn't make sense. So eventually Snoop decides it's time to leave Death Row Records. The only problem is he was still signed to Suge. And that's when Master P comes into the picture. See, Master P always respected Snoop. So he saw what Snoop was going through and he was like, look, if you're in need of a label situation, I've got your back. Now at the time, Mystical was working on an album called Unpredictable. This was around 1997 and it was his first album under No Limit Records. So Master P and Mystical both go, yo Snoop, Mystical is working on some music, would you like to work with him, right? So Snoop gets in the booth, he does his thing, and the resulting track becomes Gangsters off Mystical's Unpredictable album.
From the cold-hearted streets of the LBC to a duet with Mr. Cal and Master P.
So Master P goes, yo, how much do you want for the verse? And at this point, Snoop is broke as hell. Death Row wasn't paying him, so he doesn't have any money. So he's like, I'll take $3,500. That's all I need. So Master P goes, alright, cool, say less. And then hands him a check for $35,000. So Snoop was probably thinking, this is where I need to be right now. But he was still signed to Suge Knight. So Master P goes, I think we need to solve this contract problem of yours, right? So he heads over to the prison where Suge Knight is being held, meets with Suge, and he attempts to buy Snoop Dogg out of his contract. Now keep in mind that at this point, Death Row is in shambles. Pac is dead, Dre's gone, Snoop wants to leave, and the label owner is in jail. So the company isn't doing very well, and Suge is in need of money. So after a little bit of back and forth negotiations between the pair, Master P and Suge Knight finally agree on a number, and Snoop finally gets bought out of his Death Row contract for millions of dollars. The amount is said to be about $3 million. So Snoop gets signed to a 3-album deal at No Limit, making him a core component of No Limit Records. So once Snoop gets signed, he notices a huge difference between Death Row and No Limit. Like on Death Row, Suge Knight controlled everything. It's almost like he kept his artist on a leash because he didn't want his artist to have ownership of anything, and he ran his label like a dictatorship. But Master P is different. See, he treats his artists like Oprah treats her audience. like you get a car, you get a car, and you get a car. Oh, and I'm not done. You also get a house, and you get a house, and you get a house, right? Master P was giving away houses and assets like it was candy. And the best part is, all of these assets were placed in each rapper's name.
So this nigga showing me off the rip. I paid that nigga. Now I'm finna buy you a house in your name.
So Snoop got a house, he got some jewels, and he was set up pretty well by Master P. Now we all know nothing in life comes for free, and Snoop still had to fulfill a 3-album deal. So he gets to work. But not just on the music. Snoop gets a movie role in the film Half-Baked, which stars Dave Chappelle, in which he plays the character Scavenger Smoker. And a scavenger smoker is someone that doesn't have any broccoli of their own, but they always show up at the exact moment when you're about to consume it. So Snoop nails this role to perfection, and in doing so transcends beyond being a rapper, and he becomes the broccoli guy. Now after this, Snoop appears in another movie, and this one is called Caught Up, and it comes out 1 month after Half-Baked. So at this point it looks like Snoop is really taking this acting thing seriously. And coincidentally, Master P was also getting into film at the same time, and he dropped his first ever theater release around May of 1998, one called I Got the Hookup, and Snoop got a small role in this movie as well. So with all these things going on, like Snoop moving from Death Row to No Limit, and Snoop appearing in all these movies, the public was eagerly awaiting to see what Snoop would do next. And with all of this promo backing him, the hype behind his next album is massive. And so, on August 4th, 1998, Snoop drops his first album following Death Row, one called The Game Is to Be Sold, Not to Be Told.
I'm headed straight to the LB. Forget it, that's what they tell me.
Now this album is a slight departure from his previous sound, because he is now signed to No Limit. But despite this criticism, the album sells about 500,000 copies in the first week, proving that Snoop has still got it. Now these numbers impress Master P, so he ends up giving Snoop more creative control. So Snoop goes, look, I appreciate everything you've done for me, I really do. But the sound and production on that first album, that wasn't me. I really want to do something more authentic to my image. So Snoop then links up with Dr. Dre and producers like DJ Quick from Cali, and he decides to make an album with more of a West Coast feel. Now after working on this album for a couple of months, Snoop drops No Limit Top Dog in May of 1999, making this his second album under No Limit. This one debuts at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and sells about 160,000 copies in the first week, and by the end of the year it goes platinum. Now Exhibit appears on the second single called Please, and just keep that information in mind for later because Exhibit is a very crucial part of this story. Okay, so in the next year, Snoop drops his final album under No Limit called The Last Meal. The reason why I named it The Last Meal is because it's the last time these redneck label executives is gonna be eating off Snoop Dogg. And I'm not talking about Master P or No Limit. I'm talking about Priority Records. So the album comes out and sells about 400,000 copies in the first week and debuts at number 9 on the Billboard 200. And I know what you're thinking, right? How the hell do you debut at number 9 with 400,000 copies? I mean, in today's climate, if you sell about 400,000 copies, your album is going straight to number 1. But back then, when artists sold about 400,000 copies, their fans were like, okay, that's cool. You're a big artist, but that's not a big deal, right? And if you don't believe me, let's look at the Billboard 200 chart when Snoop Dogg dropped his album. Now, as you can see, Snoop's album is number 9 on the chart. It's a new entry, and at the end of the first week it sold about 400,000 copies. But let's go one level up. Britney Spears. Britney Spears sells about 400,000 copies in that week. And at that point, that album had been out for a long time, yet it was still selling 400,000 copies. In fact, when Britney's album came out, it sold 500,000 copies in one day. Now let's go down to number 13. Outkast is also on the list. In that week, they sold about 300,000 copies, and their album sales were already at 2 million. So yeah, people back then were really doing numbers. And Snoop's album did really well, especially considering it was the only rap album in the top 10 at the time. So when Snoop drops his third album at No Limit, he fulfills his contract with the label, and he now chooses to drop albums under his own label Doggy Style, as well as Priority Records and Capitol. Now here's where things get very interesting. Around 2002, Snoop drops album number 6, and this one is called Paid the Cost to Be the Boss. This one sells about 180,000 copies in the first week and debuts at number 12 on the Billboard 200. It also contains one of Snoop's most popular songs, Beautiful, but that's not what makes this album special. See, the album has a track called Pimp Slapped, which is a blatant diss track from Snoop Dogg to Suge Knight.
You so hardcore, why you ain't go to level 4? Oh, I know.
But why did Snoop drop this track? Well, Snoop was facing one major issue, and it goes by the name Suge Knight. See, even though Master P bought Snoop out of his contract with Death Row, Snoop and Suge was still in bad terms. And before Suge gets out of prison in 2001, he threatens to cause mayhem in the music industry and get back at the people that wronged him, which includes Snoop. Because let's face it, at this point Snoop was very vocal about his problems with Death Row and Suge Knight. And when Suge is in prison, Snoop doesn't hold back in expressing his dislike for Suge and Death Row Records. So when Suge gets out of prison, he has many scores to settle.
Suge Knight recently said he used to be a superstar and now he's just a no-limit soldier. What do you say to that?
Nothing. He used to be a CEO, now he's just a hitman.
And one thing I didn't mention is that while Suge was in prison, death threats were made between Snoop and Suge. So this was not your ordinary beef, right? This wasn't Kendrick and Drake. This was a real beef with life or death consequences. So Suge gets out of prison, he goes back to running Death Row Records, he signs more artists like Crooked I and Corrupt. And Corrupt was being signed for a second time to Death Row, but this time as a vice president. And Corrupt's signing angers Snoop, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. Now, one day Suge Knight decides to go out to the club. With his usual intimidating presence and his posse, he spots Exhibit from across the room. Now Suge, always wanting to assert his dominance, walks straight up to Exhibit. And he goes, "Yo, what's up?" "Yo, Suge, yo, how's it going, man?" Exhibit is trying to play it cool. Then Suge goes, "Look, I'm not gonna waste your time. I only have one question to ask you. Are you banging with Snoop?" Right? So Exhibit goes, "Snoop? Are you talking about Snoopy? I don't know, what is a Snoop?" So essentially Exhibit tells Suge that he doesn't really mess with Snoop like that, and says that Snoop is just someone that he works with, and that's that. Okay, so Snoop Dogg hears about this confrontation, and in the song Pimp Slapped, he essentially calls Exhibit weak for folding under Suge Knight's pressure.
And skirt up Wilshire Boulevard. I'm not Exhibit, you can't pull my whole cord.
He also has some very choice words for Corrupt, who joined Death Row again, and says that even though Corrupt is his brother, he will not hesitate to take him down.
Your rappers and artists tell him, shut it up, cause I'm the last one of them up, especially Corrupt.
He also tells Suge Knight to start rapping because his label has no talent anymore, especially considering Tupac isn't there, Dre isn't there, and Snoop isn't there anymore. And even though Suge Knight was trying to return Death Row to its former glory, it just wasn't working, and this just gave Snoop more ammunition for his diss track. Now another thing that was a catalyst for this diss track was the altercation between Suge and Snoop Dogg at the 2002 BET Awards. And it's actually more of an argument than an altercation. So it's the 2002 BET Awards, and Snoop and Suge are both in attendance. Everyone knows that there's tension between Snoop and Suge, and the room feels electric as if something is about to happen. So during a commercial break, the audience is buzzing when suddenly a seat directly across the aisle from Snoop opens up. So Suge, dressed head to toe in red leather, makes his move over to the chair and sits down. So Suge goes, "Man, I just want to apologize for how things turned out at Death Row. I didn't mean to become the boogeyman of hip-hop. I didn't mean to not pay you, and I apologize for the way things turned out. No, I'm just messing with you guys. That's what he should have said. But instead, Suge Knight and Snoop get into an all-out cussing match right there at the BET Awards. Now, luckily, Steve Harvey was there, and he's on stage seeing what's happening, so he decides to call for respect between the two titans, reminding them of where they are. And surprisingly, it works. Snoop and Suge back down, and Suge moves to another area in the venue. So with all of these events taking place, and with all the death threats and public animosity, Snoop put a lot of his pain and anger into the track Pimp Slapped, and the result was an extremely disrespectful track directed at Suge. Now, the Suge Knight vs Snoop Dogg beef lasted a couple of years, but by around 2013 things began to simmer down, and Snoop even said that he was cool with Suge. Now, as far as Snoop signing with Master P goes, that was a very good strategic move for him at the time, because after signing to No Limit, he got the Prince treatment. He got given a house, jewelry, assets under his name, and that's something he never once experienced at Death Row. Not only that, when Snoop was signed to Death Row, he had to make music under terrible working conditions, and he was pretty much a pawn in Suge Knight's game. So signing to No Limit taught Snoop Dogg about ownership, about being your own boss. And those are things Snoop applied to his career after he left No Limit Records, like when he began his own label. So Snoop learned a lot from Master P. He never has anything bad to say about the man, and to this day they're still on the best of terms. Snoop and Suge, on the other hand, they're cool, but they'll never be friends. I mean, how do you befriend someone that once wished death upon you? It's not so easy. So yeah, that's the story of Snoop Dogg and No Limit Records. Do you think Snoop signing to No Limit was a good move for him? Or should he have remained loyal to Suge? Let me know down below. New video coming up soon. Also add me on Instagram at Ali Talks Music. Till next time, peace.